one in the United States should be retiring at 65 years old. Frankly, I think retirement itself is a stupid idea unless you have some sort of health problem. Everybody that I know who is elderly, who has retired, is dead within 5 years. And if you talk to people who are elderly and they lose their purpose in life by losing their job and they stop working, things go to hell in a handbasket real quick. But put all of that aside, just on a fiscal level and on a logical level. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt established 65 as the retirement age, the average life expectancy in the United States was 63 years old. Today, the average life expectancy in the United States is close to 80. It's totally insane that you believe that you should be able to work from the time that you are essentially 20 to the time that you are 65, which is a 45-year period, pay in, and then you will receive Social Security benefits sufficient to support you and your family, you and your wife or whatever, for like another 20 years. That's crazy talk. That is not fiscally sustainable.
Okay, what does that mean? Well, Ben Shapiro there, one of the leading voices of the right, saying that he just doesn't understand why people will ever retire. Now, put yourself in the perspective of a young person who's just starting their career out. And the frustration is so many of our youth feel that the ladder that their parents and their grandparents climbed to success is being pulled up behind them as they go. And as millennials and Gen Z age and come up, the opportunities they expected that their forefathers got are being removed. And here you got Ben Shapiro, who's not that old, saying, yeah, you should work till you're dead. It's quite the Republican message for the youth. But then again, reaching the youth isn't messy their specialty. For example, here's the Talking Point USA. Of course, it's the largest conservative youth movement there is. Here's how they decided to reach the youth at Eastern Tennessee State University.
Rittenhouse opened with his own account of what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, saying he was thankful he was acquitted because he knew he was innocent.
They put me on trial for defending myself. And sometimes I think, what would have happened if they would have killed me? Would they have prosecuted the people who killed me if I would have died? And I don't think they would have.
Rittenhouse was also faced with questions about the support he's received and why he's qualified to talk about gun rights.
Well, I'm actually a political consultant for Texas Gun Rights. I'm a writer for them, and I write articles.
Yeah, Kyle Rittenhouse is their big youth voter outreach guy. If you looked at that crowd, one of my favorite things about that clip is, look at the youths, is what I tweeted at the time. That is a lot of gray hair in that crowd. It looks like a hell of a lot more people from the neighborhood came in than actual students, which, by the way, if you look at the rest of the clip, he did mobilize the students outside to protest. And that really is I thought that was the perfect example of how the efforts by the right to reach Gen Z and millennial youth votes is going for them. And it goes to their struggles. And I tell you what, I got the perfect guest as usual to talk about this critical moment, just as President Biden and Donald Trump clinched their party's nominations and we're heading into the general election. So how important both those campaigns will be to the nation's youth. So perfect time to talk about that once again. I've got the perfect guest. Let's get on with the show. I'm Fred Wellman. Welcome to On Democracy with FB Wellman. Oh man, welcome to On Democracy with FB Wellman. I'm still Fred Wellman, your host. It is great to be here. I am so excited to talk to our guest, discuss this issue that I love. I talk about the youth vote and youth activism a lot. Here's my friend John Della Volpe's book, Fight. Just a big proud. I believe he's on the board of advisors of our guest. Our guest this week is Cristina Cienzuna Ramirez. She's the president of Next Gen America, the country's largest youth voting rights organization, which helped mobilize 1 in 9 young voters across the country in the 2020 elections. Cristina, man, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks for having me and for covering the youth vote.
Yeah, I'm just passionate about it because I got some youths at my home. I opened the show before you came on with a couple of clips. Ben Shapiro talking about how we should raise the retirement age and why do people retire at all? I talked about Kyle Rittenhouse, of course, is the outreach guy for Talking Points USA and how he spoke in East Tennessee State University. And there was more youth outside protesting him being there than in. It kind of strikes me of how they're sending over and not even subtle messages to young Americans. But at the same time, we hear a lot of talk about youth fleeing the Democrats, right? Specifically President Biden of late. Now, your group's one of 15 youth activist groups that endorsed President Biden just this week. So I just open it right up front. Should we worry? And why do you feel good about President Biden?
Yeah, so we endorsed Joe Biden actually in June of spring of last year.
Right.
And that endorsement came because, a lot of, like you said, a lot of young people, what's fascinating is young people, this generation in particular, there's two big myths around young people. One is that young people are apathetic and they don't vote. Well, the last three elections have seen the highest youth voter turnout in American history. So that's not true. And young people are supposed to become more conservative as they get older, right? And people have said, oh, the youth vote's always been more progressive. Well, that's actually not true. Democrats and Republicans used to pretty evenly split the youth vote. And that started to change around 2004. And you started to see Democrats take a larger and larger share of the youth vote. And now you have so many young people voting overwhelmingly for progressive policy, which in this country in our two-party system means Democrats, that it is canceling out last election, the Republican boomer vote. Right. And so what we see now is that it's so critical to invest in young voters. And for us, Joe Biden was not the youth vote candidate in 2020. It was Bernie Sanders, but he adopted a lot of the policies that were very popular back then on student debt, on tackling the climate crisis, and really delivered on those policies. And so that's why we endorsed him, and a lot of other groups did as well.
And he's been approaching the age issue a lot lately. And I kind of really dig the approach he's saying, which looks not about physical age, it's about the age of your ideas, right? And I really, that struck me even, and it is very true that there is a regression to some of the ideas that we're facing on the conservative movement, as opposed to what we're seeing from the Biden administration and the Democrats. I mean, is that a message you think resonates, or is it strong, or will it work?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I remind people that, again, in 2020, Bernie Sanders was the youth vote candidate, and he's actually older than Joe Biden. Yeah. If you ask a lot of young people who they still support, a lot of them still say Bernie Sanders, right? And I think what that to me shows is it is ultimately about progressive policy. And if you look at where the Democratic Party was and Joe Biden was in the 1990s, whether it was on crime, marijuana, abortion, marriage equality, and especially economic populist message, it was very different than he is today. His State of the Union speech focused on building an economy from the bottom up and middle out, not trickle down economics, that what the Democratic Party adopted from Ronald Reagan, right? And really abandoned the labor movement for many years. Who did he get up and say thank you to at the State of the Union? Sean Fain, the head of the United Auto Workers, that publicly says, I don't think billionaires should exist, that they are antithetical to building an economy for all of us. So the fact that we've come to this moment is because young people and progressives have organized to this point to get us here. At Next Gen, we support Joe Biden this election, but we don't put our hope in any single one politician or party. We put our hope in America's young people. We believe that politicians respond to social movements and not the other way around.
That's powerful. And organizing is the key. Now, you did organize I remember you organized a roundtable, I believe, after the State of the Union speech. I haven't had a chance to talk about the State of the Union. What was the kind of key takeaways for you and your organization and the youth, that young voters that watched the State of the Union that came out of that? I mean, it's a powerful speech, obviously, but what's some of the key takeaways you took from that?
Well, I mean, the fact that not only was it a real strong economic justice message that talked about building an economy that speaks to young people, talked about housing affordability, right? Young people, young adults now are the least likely generation to become homeowners, talked about the student debt crisis. And when the Supreme Court that he called out, who has blocked many initiatives or overturned Roe, that said, look, I still canceled student debt for nearly 4 million Americans. And ultimately, it's, billions and billions of dollars of student debt that have been canceled that was really weighing down a generation of America's, of Americans. These are all big popular policies. And then lastly, really focusing also on the climate crisis as also a clean jobs program. These overwhelmingly are popular policies. And the Biden administration has to do a lot more to make sure that young people know about these policies, because when you poll young people, they say, oh my God, we're so supportive of this. How many of you know that this has actually been passed? A lot of folks don't. And I don't ever blame the population, because if you blame the population, then you can't solve the problem, right? You've got to actually look at yourself and what your own messaging is. So I think that was all really strong. And then the last thing I'm going to say is, there is a clear divide with young folks in the administration on the conflict in Gaza and in Palestine and the approach. But you're starting to see the administration shift and try and respond to the divide that it has with its base on this issue. And ultimately, I think that power moves through organizing. Like you said, it comes back down to organizing, that no candidate is ever going to align with you perfectly, but it's about who can you organize and push in the right direction. And I think that you can see the organizing and pushing that the community has been doing is starting to move the administration in the direction that where most young people are at and most Democrats are at.
Yeah, and I think it will be powerful. I mean, I'm an old soldier, if you don't know. I'm a veteran of the Army, and I think there's a few countries in the world could drive in there, set up a pier off the shore of Gaza. There'll be American flags out there dropping off food, ships coming in thanks to the American military. It is a unique dichotomy, I think, visually. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Do you think that will help ameliorate some of this concern, or is there more to come?
I think it's a very active and moment. I think for some folks it'll help. I think ultimately people are looking for a big policy shift as far as how the United States relates to a ceasefire permanently, but also relates to pushing and holding accountable the Israeli government. I think there has come a better place where there is acknowledgement that Israeli suffering and children and people suffering is equal to Palestinian suffering. And that what we have seen and what we are seeing play out in Gaza and Palestine with our tax dollars is something that especially the Democratic base does not align with. And so I don't think that this will appease those voters overall, but it is a shift. And that even this last week, the president saying during an MSNBC interview that there were going to be red lines for the administration of Benjamin Netanyahu, who is really unpopular in Israel itself. Yeah. So I think that we're going to continue to see the administration have to make hard decisions about how far it's willing to go down the road with Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, and we've already started to see that. Yeah,
you're definitely seeing the inklings of it. Of course, the Vice President Harris has been stepping forward. I mean, I do think you're right. And that is a big shift, I believe. And of course, it's a long way to November, right? I mean, now part of that though is, and I wanted to circle back to something you said very interesting to me earlier, is it's organizing, right? Which was why I was encouraged to see the 15 groups all come together. And I'm involved with Voters for Tomorrow, and I've spoken to a number of these groups and yourself. Is there a good is that a great sign that the outreach is real, that the Biden campaign is taking this very seriously, that the youth movement and votes are going to matter more than anything? I mean, we're a good amount of time out. It was encouraging to me, at least, to see you guys step up and the outreach that is going on. Is that hopeful for you and a good sign?
Yeah, I think, look, our organization has been around for 10 years. We were founded 10 years ago with the idea that if we could organize young people to scale, we could tackle the biggest crisis of our time, which is the climate crisis. And I'll tell you what, 10 years ago, everyone said it was a waste of time and money, that one, young people didn't turn out, and two, politicians would never do anything on the climate crisis. And it's 10 years later, we've had 3 of the highest youth voter turnouts, and we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is actually the single largest piece of legislation to an investment to tackle the climate crisis in the world. So I think in the first year where young people turned out in record numbers, people were like, wow, what a cool anomaly. And then the second year, they were like, oh, well, that's great. And they responded policy-wise. And then after 2022, they were like, holy shit, we have to pay attention to the youth vote and fully invest in it. And so this is the first election in our organization's history where we are seeing party structures and candidates fully appreciate and understand that they have to respond to the youth vote. And the exciting part about that is that it is not just about, they understand that young people, like you said, right, that they do vote overwhelmingly progressive, but they want progressive policy. They are not just looking for the D, they are looking for where do you stand on these issues. And that is the really, I think, exciting thing, to see the party be very much in a better place as far as its policies to speaking to working and middle class America than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, and it goes to our opponents as well. We always have to, I always say as an old soldier, the enemy gets a vote. Well, it looks like our opponents in the Republican Party have gone the opposite direction. I mean, I think we just heard this week that the RNC is going to be shutting down their minority and community outreach program almost immediately. They had set up community centers in Latino regions, Latino areas. So it looks like the Republican Party's made a very different choice, which probably bodes well for the progressive movement, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do even, you mentioned Turning Point at the beginning of the conversation, which is a right-wing, you could even call it a right-wing, like neo-fascist youth group, right? Yeah. They are freaked out about the youth vote on the Republican side. They're freaked out about the numbers they saw previously in Black and brown communities. So they understand that they can invest in these communities and they're not going to ever win the majority of the youth vote. They're not ever going to win the majority of the Latino or Black vote, but that they can shave off margins. And I think our side has to take that really seriously. Is it a good sign that they're not wanting to invest? It's a good sign for them not winning an election. Yeah. But I think we have to take seriously that, again, they can invest so much money and know that they're not going to win overall, but can they shave enough off with misinformation, disinformation, and targeting those communities to suppress the vote enough to win in key states?
And you've been fighting that. I know your background actually long before you ran for Senate years ago. You were actually that voting rights, and this suppression of minority voices, especially, is kind of where you got your start, if I'm correct. So it is a big issue. I know they are going to elect. They are going to invest heavily in, quote, election integrity. And in the end, you're a voting rights organization. It's about access to the ballot and encouraging people to register, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I ran for Senate, what was interesting, and I got to travel my great state of Texas, which is one of the youngest and most diverse states in the country, is the thing that was most popular that I talked about was about voting rights, talking about the idea that we should make it as accessible and easy as possible for every single American to vote. That why wasn't Election Day a national federal holiday? Why did we have to register to vote instead of having automatic voter registration? Yeah. And that in other countries, they had much greater participation, but the way we had designed elections in this country, and especially in Black and brown communities, where you can wait for hours and hours, or even at polling stations at college campuses, every time we film the long lines at college campuses where young people line up for hours to vote in an election, people will go, yeah, look at all those young people waiting to cast their ballot. Those are terrible images, actually, because if you go into more affluent white neighborhoods, there are no lines. There's more polling locations. There's more investment. And so it should be an obscenity that any American has to wait in line for hours to cast their ballot. We should be investing to make sure that communities have the ease that other communities have. That should be the bottom line where we're seeking for every single American. And so I think we still have a long way to go as that aspect. But again, if they make it less people access the ballot, make it harder to vote, that's how they win.
Yeah, and that it really is the danger, and they know it. That's why they're scared, right? That's why they're attacking Taylor Swift, right? When all she's ever said is register and vote. She's never actually endorsed a candidate. I think this is Marsha Blackburn many years ago.
And even if she did, guess what? That is her right.
Right.
As an American to say, I want to vote for this person. I encourage you. They share my values. Vote for them. They are so freaked out, and it's just so wild. Like, man. And I think the number showed that like 1 in 5 adult Americans believe that Taylor Swift was part of this conspiracy. It's incredible. Yeah. Just how far that rabbit hole goes.
Well, they fall down it. This is probably a really great place to take a quick break. We got some amazing sponsors always here on Democracy, so we'll be right back. Someone told me there are science-backed ingredients that could help me feel 15 years younger in just a matter of months. I wouldn't have believed it. Well, then I tried Qualia Senolytics. As we age, everyone accumulates senescent cells in their body. Senescent cells cause symptoms of aging, such as aches and pains, slow workout recoveries, sluggish mental and physical energy that I know so well, all associated with that middle-aged feeling. Now, also known as zombie cells, they're old and worn out and serving a no useful function for your health anymore, but they're taking up space and nutrients from our healthy cells. Much like pruning the yellow and dead leaves and plants in my garden, Qualia Senolytic removes those worn out senescent cells to allow for the rest of them to thrive in your body. You take it just 2 days a month. The formula is non-GMO, vegan, as well as gluten-free, and the ingredients are meant to complement one another, factoring in the combined effect of all the ingredients together. But best of all, on top of all that, you have a 100-day money-back guarantee. And since taking Qualia Senolytics, I have had higher energy levels. I feel 15 years younger, more productive, enthusiastic in life. Not to mention, importantly for me, less aches and pains. Now, resist aging at the cellular level. Try Qualia Senolytic. Go to neurohacker.com/Fred for up to $100 off, and then use code FRED at checkout for an additional 15% off. That's neurohacker.com/Fred for an extra 15% off of your purchase. And man, thanks Neurohacker for sponsoring our show. The older I get, the more I find myself wanting to be more intentional about the way I live, eat, and take care of my body. Mosh is a company founded by Maria Shriver and her son Patrick Schwarzenegger with a simple mission to create a conversation about brain health through food, education, and research. Now, Maria's father suffered from Alzheimer's, and since then, she and Patrick have dedicated themselves to finding ways to help other families dealing with this debilitating disease. Mosh joined forces with the world's top scientists and functional nutritionists to go beyond your average protein bar with 6 delicious flavors. Each Mosh bar has 12 grams of protein and is made with ingredients to support brain health, like ashwagandha, lion's mane, collagen, and omega-3s. They also have a line of plant-based protein bars that come in 3 delicious flavors of their own. But here's the best part to make you feel good about this company. Mosh donates a portion of all proceeds from your order to fund gender-based brain health research through the Women's Alzheimer's Movement. Now, why gender-based? 2/3 of all Alzheimer's patients are women. Mosh is working closely to close the gap between women and men's health research. So, Mosh bars are truly delicious. I have a Mosh bar every morning before my walk. It's a perfect way to kickstart my day. My favorite Mosh bar is the Peanut Butter Crunch. It's incredible. Now, if you want to find ways to give back to others and fuel your body and your brain, Mosh bar is the perfect choice for you. Now, head to moshlife.com/Fred. You'll save 20% off plus free shipping in your first 6-count trial pack. That's 20% off plus free shipping in your first 6-count trial pack at moshlife.com/Fred. Thank you, Mosh, for all you do, and thank you for sponsoring this episode. And we're back. I wanted to shift into something I've been saying a lot, and it kind of goes back to the age thing, but it also goes to you. I've seen a lot, especially African-American and Black voices say, really, it's not about Biden's age as much as it's about Vice President Kamala Harris's skin tone and gender, right? And I think, I watched her HBCU tour unfold where she was greeted like an absolute rock star. I've seen the Vice President speak. She's wildly popular with young Americans, right? Is she being underestimated in all of this as well?
I haven't looked at her polling numbers since the Gaza-Palestine conflict erupted. But previous to that, like right before that, she was polling at 67% approval rating for Gen Z voters. I mean, that is really, really high, right? So I think that a lot of people don't understand is the Democratic Party is very diverse in its coalition. And there's still, you have to be able to speak to young voters, to female voters in particular, and voters of color. And so she helps do that for a cohort of voters which are really, really critical for the Democratic Party. For me also, when I look at, again, like I said, consider myself a solid progressive. I believe always in voting, not for me, it's less about purity and more about power. So when I say that, I mean, who can I vote for that I'm most likely to push in the right direction to deliver on the policies that I care about? And it is so clear when you look up and down at the ticket of the Biden-Harris administration, it's like night and day. When you talked about new ideas versus old ideas, it feels like Donald Trump I wouldn't care if he was 50 years younger. He feels like he's straight out of the 1950s on every single policy issue when it's gay marriage, contraception, abortion, the rights of communities of color, climate change, or the environment, anything. He's just so far behind, and he's trying to take our country backwards versus trying to actually take our country forwards. And that's just so clear.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. So, you guys have been around since 2013, as you mentioned, and you've been the forefront of this conversation with youth voting. As I was doing my research and preparing, what caught my eye was the surround sound strategy, that you guys have an approach around. And I think about a lot. People ask me all the time. It's a funny story. When I was a public relations guy, somebody once asked me, I think it was a veteran issue, but it relates. They said, "Hey, Fred, we want to put an ad to reach veterans. What magazine or newspaper should we put it in?" And they literally said, and I'm like, oh God, y'all, it's the 20th, it's the 21st century. It's not, there's no the way to reach them. So is that what you're talking about when you talk about a surround sound strategy, reaching all these Americans, these hard to reach Americans in this modern communications environment?
Yeah. I think the old way of doing campaigning, especially for young people, doesn't really make sense. And the data is very clear for all voters, right? You've got to, I think it's funny when they're always like, what's the one magic thing?
Yeah,
to
the one
get
magic
out?
thing.
And it's funny. And they'll say like, what's the one message too, right?
Right.
We rarely ever like, what is the white message, right? No one else would sound crazy. You would divide that up, right? You would segment. And so for us, we do the same thing. It's a very diverse coalition. We need to make sure they're hearing from us on college and community college campuses. So we'll be on, sometime, this election will be like on 114 college campuses across 8 states with hundreds of organizers and volunteers reaching out to young people, making sure they know to vote. And then they're also going to pull out their phone and they're going to maybe see a local influencer or a college athlete that they follow talk about voting and making sure you're registered and pledged at NextGen. And they might get a call from us as well. And we even do really fun things like we are now organizing in the gaming community as well, organizing through Discord and working with gaming influencers. And even organizing on dating apps, because you can search by age, geography, and even political persuasion, and sliding into people's DMs, talking about the sexiest thing there is, which is dating democracy. And we're not catfishing anyone. It's not like you show up at the polling location for your first date. But we talk to people about things they care about and make sure they're ready for this election as well.
No, I love it. And you do also partnering with college athletes. With the NIL changes and rules, you can actually kind of sponsor and partner with athletes. I thought that was really, that caught my eye immediately as well. Like, how is that? What are you guys doing there? I hadn't heard a lot about that. I'm eager to hear more.
Yeah, so since college athletes can now use their likeness and image, a lot of them have big followings on their campuses with other young people. They are in their own right influencers in the community. So we sign on dozens of college athletes on key campuses that we're already organizing and ask them to encourage their own followers to make sure what their plan to vote is this election. And it was really successful in 2022. So now we've expanded it for this upcoming election, and we're excited. A bunch of other people are starting to do that as well. And we even have done some speed dating events on college campuses and invited those college athlete influencers to then come talk and do speed dating events with folks where we talk about issues and what's important to you, because there's also a lot of data for straight guys out there that a lot of young women are not interested in dating men that have conservative values or aren't pro-choice. So it's also the very sexy, hot thing to do for your dating life, to be on the right side of politics.
I'll keep that in mind. Luckily, I'm a grandpa, and so I have my youth kids kind of sent me this direction as a progressive. My daughter likes to claim credit for turning him into a liberal. On that note, when you're trying to, as you talk about the issues, and we talk about these things that are driving a lot of the economic issues, it really does circle back a lot. We talked about it briefly about bodily autonomy, about a woman's right to choose her about, and it seems to be met. And now we're seeing an assault. There's a lot of talk about the IVF, which will affect young women, but really an assault on contraception. And I mean, I had just interviewed Gloria Johnson, who's running for Senate, of course, in Tennessee, where she tried to fill a bill to protect family planning and contraception. It was voted down by the Republicans. Is that, clearly that's probably going to energize a lot of young women who are just feeling that their lives are kind of stripped away from them, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, to imagine for a generation of women that are of childbearing age to go back literally overnight 50 years as far as what you can decide what you do with your body, when you plan to make a family, how you respond to like your most private health decisions ever. Guess what? You strip people of their rights, you piss them off. And they came out, young women especially came out and voted in record numbers. In some states you had, like in Pennsylvania, you had a 10-point margin of difference of women registering, young women registering over men. That is ahistoric. That happened because Roe was overturned. And now these assaults on contraception, the conversations just around IVF, I think people are starting to see that the extreme right-wing plan was always that, just incredibly extreme. And even though there is supposed to be a separation of church and state, it's very clear that the plan of these folks is to encode their religious beliefs into our legal system and over our bodies and how we decide what happens to them and how we make our own families.
That makes sense. Now, I always try to leave my show and my viewers with, some optimism, one, but two, empower them. I think too often we see this more than just hitting a social media post. What, in your view, as leading an organization like NextGen, who can people watch the show? Hundreds of thousands watch the Midas Touch Network. It's amazing, and my show. How can we empower them to be a part of this movement, much more than just watching the show? And what do you tell people to how help them mobilize and be a part of this movement?
Well, I would encourage people to go to nextgen.org/volunteer. So when I said we'll send and make tens of millions of calls and texts this election to young people. And you can do that from anywhere from your home, and you can do that at any age. And so there is a role for folks to play as volunteers in this movement to help us make sure that we reach young people. Every year there are 4 million young people that turn 18 in this country. Wow. And they have just a dramatically different viewpoint overall than the Republican leadership in this country. And if you want to put your money, time, resources into a population that can decide the future of this country, it is with young people. We are just scratching the surface of what's possible with the youth vote in this country. This is the most diverse generation in the United States history. This is the most queer generation. This is the most progressive generation. And the last thing is that the other myth is that as young people get older, they become more conservative. Well, I'm a millennial, and the data is showing both in the United States and in Western Europe that older millennials are staying just as progressive as they were. So we are rupturing the long-held political viewpoints in this country. And who has the power to determine what happens in this country are the 70+ million young eligible voters that combined together have the power to determine who gets elected, what gets decided, and what gets on the agenda.
And they're watching, and as we started at the very beginning of the show, they're watching the ladder being pulled up, in front of them for the things they hope for. I mean, I hear that all the time. How many young people, frankly, my own kids say, it's like, just like this conversation we had at the beginning about taking away Social Security benefits. It's like, when do we get our turn? The success that our grandparents and parents had is being ripped behind as we go, from unbelievable debt, the price of homes. So there's a lot to be said for why that's being driven, and groups like yours reminding them that the real power to stop that is at the ballot box, isn't it?
That's right. And I always say to young people, look, it's not the only way you make change, but it is the most basic thing you must do, not the only thing you should do. Never leave the power of your vote on the table. Go out, volunteer, protest, organize, do whatever it is that speaks to you, but make sure at a bare minimum that you're always voting as well.
Well, that's a great place to wind up. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're really busy right now. And good luck this cycle, and keep up doing what you're doing.
Thanks for covering the youth vote.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Talk to you again soon. Just what a great conversation. Christina and her group are on the leading edge. They partner with groups I've been involved with, like Voters Tomorrow, and friends of mine like John Della Volpe. It is so key. And if you got that, it is so key. I was very encouraged. On my way to the studio today, we filmed on Wednesday. I saw that Congressman Ilhan Omar was asked very directly by CNN, will you vote for President Biden in the fall? And she just literally said, of course. We're in a fight against fascism. That was encouraging. Look, folks, family is family. We're going to fight. We're going to disagree. But in the end, we come together when it matters. So I'm cautiously optimistic that these dangers, as we talked about in the interview with Gaza and Israel and the other issues we face, we will come together at the right moment in November and stand up against this authoritarian movement. You saw what happened this week. So the final death knell of the Republican National Committee, the RNC, the party has come. They've handed over the reins of the Republican Party to Donald J. Trump and his family. Laura Trump, who's never run an organization beyond the size of a podcast, is now in charge of a national party. What shocked me in the stories about this takeover is, if you looked about paragraph 9 in an NBC story, it mentions offhand that the digital and fundraising arms of the Republican National Committee, based in Washington, D.C., will be up and moving to Palm Beach, Florida. They're combining the fundraising efforts completely of the RNC with Donald Trump's campaign. A campaign and operation of PACs that has spent more money on his legal problems and legal battles than actual campaigning. That's the future of the RNC. So look, I wish him the best of luck. I'm not going to shed a single tear as they commit suicide as a party, but we should be concerned. Something I tell a story, you may have heard in a while, I used to be with the Lincoln Project, and my peers there, Gale and Steve Schmidt, used to say quite often, still do, and I say it too, is the Republican Party in many ways is kind of like a star when it dies. Because if you know when a star, as it burns out and it gets smaller, it gets actually smaller and hotter and more dangerous. And then oftentimes at some point it explodes into a supernova. That is a very dangerous situation, right? If you think about that, things don't necessarily end peacefully. And so we have to be even more on guard and more aware of the authoritarian efforts they're making to stop their losses, to roll back our rights of voting, roll back our ability to influence our own democracy, this constitutional republic, as they like to say it. Here in Missouri, where I live, we're trying to get on the ballot an initiative petition. There's an initiative petition going on to get into the Constitution or a vote about women's reproductive rights. The Republicans know they're going to lose that. They know they're going to lose. We've lost on both sides of this. So what are they trying to do? The Republicans in the legislature are trying to change the entire process so that less than 20% of people in the state, if they disagree with the Constitution initiative petition, can stop it. They're handing power to less than 20%. That's not a coincidence they're trying to do that. They're trying to stop our ability to influence our own government. It's very, very dangerous. Just this week, too, Donald Trump said in an interview that those who oppose him, his opponents, are worse than our enemies in Russia and the foreign powers. There's the real seditionists and the real traitors to our country. It's a very short stone's throw from calling average Americans who oppose you politically enemies and seditionists to throwing them in jail. It's very dangerous, the slope we're on. So get out there. As Christina said, get involved, pick up the phone, volunteer, call, postcard, go to your local school board election, go to your city council, watch the meetings, participate in our democracy in every way you can, because you may not get to at some point. And that's a very scary thought. We're in general election season. As you know, I'm the national chairman of the Forgotten Democrats. We'll be having a town hall next week. I'm excited. I hope you join us. If you want to join the Forgotten Democrats, I'm very excited. You don't even have to do a monthly donation anymore. Just any little bit can help. But if you just want to join our email list, it's really simple. You just text Fred to 33777, and you'll be right on our list. Small donation will be part of the ForgottenDemocrats.org. It's ForgottenDemocrats.org. I'd love to have you. Been a great show. It's been a great week. Our new series that we're running called In the Hot Seat with FP Wellman is doing gangbusters on the MeidasTouch Network. I've already interviewed Colin Allred, Ryan Bussey in Montana, Gloria Johnson, Debbie McCarsell-Powell in Florida. They're just blowing up. You get to learn a little bit about these people who are running for higher office in our country in races you may know, and then races like Kaylee Peterson, who's running in Idaho 1 in Congress for Congress, who you may not have heard about, but it's fascinating, her story. So check those out. They're being posted on MeidasTouch several times a week now. As always, you can find me on X/Twitter as FP Wellman, Threads and Instagram, FP Wellman Official. Follow the show on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe if you can to our own channel. That's the On Democracy podcast on YouTube as well. We'd love to have you there. In the meantime, keep up the fight, get involved, and we can't wait to see you next week.